Here we arrive to the casting step. This is probably the most easiest thing to do when it comes to mask making. The term casting is basically the making of the actual rubber mask itself by pouring the liquid material into the mold. For this segment, I'm going to show you guys how to cast latex and EcoFlex silicone. First, I'd like to thank Inflicted for introducing me to the EcoFlex silicone material. I recommend you guys check out his channel and his masks, so subscribe to him as well, and the link to his channel will be right here. A lot of you guys are wondering what the differences are between latex and silicone. So first, I'll explain to you guys the advantages and disadvantages for both. Latex is pretty much like glue. You apply it and you wait for it to dry, and there you go. Latex is pretty basic, and the best part is it's very cheap. When it comes to physical properties, latex is pretty rigid and strong. When you guys cast a mask in latex, the mask will have the ability to keep its shape if you guys make the cast thick enough. The downside is that over time the latex will shrink and it will deform depending on how you take care of it. I recommend latex for people who are more into the simple mask making aspect. I also highly recommend latex for people who are just starting out mask making. Silicone, on the other hand, is quite different. You will need several additives just to mix a single batch of it, making silicone a quite complicated material to use. Now when it comes to the physical properties of silicone, silicone will stretch more than its original size depending on which kind of silicone you get. It also happens to be durable as well. The best part of silicone, especially EcoFlex, is that it feels like human skin. Not only feels like human skin, but once you wear it, it moves with your face. The only downside of silicone is that it's really expensive, and it will take some time to get used to. Silicone, especially EcoFlex, is great for full head masks. I recommend silicone for mask makers who are willing to explore with new materials to use, not to mention mask makers who are more experienced. So now let's go over the materials. I'll go over with latex first, since latex is a simple material to use. So the only materials that you guys will need for casting latex will be a respirator, mold buckles, now this is only for full head masks, and latex. Now the links to where to buy these materials can be found in the description. So when casting with latex, there are several methods to use. One basic method is called slip casting. This is basically where you pour the whole entire bucket of latex onto the mold and pour back the rest, so that a layer of latex will be left on the mold. Do this as many times as desired to get the desired thickness of your latex mask. For a video on slip casting, you guys should check out this video from Shadow Maker of Masks. If you guys haven't done so already, check out this guy's amazing art, and don't forget to subscribe to him. Here's another method of casting latex. I call this one the overfill method. It's basically where you pour the whole bucket of latex into the mold and let it sit there for a while. After that, pour the latex back into the bucket, and you should end up with one thick cast in the mold. The cool part about this method is that you only have to do this once in order to get a thick cast. I've actually never seen someone demonstrate this method except for one, and that's Shadow Maker of Masks. So here's the video in which he demonstrates this particular method. You guys should check it out. Now the third method I came up with, I call it the gauze method because you actually use hospital gauze to help the cast become more rigid once pulled out. The more rigid it is, the more it keeps its shape. So basically for this method, you're going to apply the gauze right when the first layer of latex is about to dry. Once the gauze latex layer is dry, add another layer of latex on top, and repeat the gauze method as many times as you wish. So I'm actually going to demonstrate this method for the cast for cradle. Alright, so let's get started. The first thing you guys will need to do before casting is to check if the environment that you are at is well ventilated. Also, be sure to wear a respirator when handling latex. Now the first thing you do is to slip cast the first layer and let it dry. Now make sure that the latex doesn't build up in the nose area, so you guys are going to have to swish it around a bit if it does build up in the nose. Once the first layer is beginning to solidify into rubber, start applying the gauze. When doing this, be sure to not apply gauze into the eyes, nose, and the jaw, because if you do, it will be a bit more difficult to cut off the jaw, nose holes, and the eye holes once the whole thick cast is dry. Now once the first gauze layer is dry, apply another layer of slip casted latex. Now if you guys want, you can repeat the gauze layers as many times as you wish in order to get the desired thickness. Once everything is dry, you guys are now ready for the best part of mask making. pulling out the blank cast itself. So the materials that you guys will need to cast EcoFlex silicone will be a rag, measuring cups, silicone, popsicle sticks, silicone pigment, slacker. Now this is actually optional, and I'll show you guys what slacker does later on. And mold buckles. You'll need 2, and you guys can also use a belt. They'll also work too. And again, these materials can be bought at the links below, but some materials can be bought at your local store. So here's a simple overview when casting with EcoFlex silicone or any other type of silicone. When using silicone, you will need to mix 2 components together, part A and part B. Depending on what silicone you get, there are different ratios on how to mix one. For instance, EcoFlex silicone will require you to mix equal amounts of both parts in order to activate the silicone itself. By mixing both parts of silicone, you're making the material vulnerable to dry, now that it's activated and all. For casting with silicone, you will not be able to do the slip casting and overfill method just like latex, mainly because you will contaminate the activated silicone, which is parts A and B combined, to the separate unactivated silicone, which is the silicone in the buckets. So in basic terms, once you mix part A and part B together, you will indeed use every drop of it to the mold, since you cannot put it back into the original containers. Alright, so now let's get started. Since I'm going to cast a full-headed mask using a 2-part mold, you guys will need a mold buckle or a belt. The purpose of the buckle is to hold the 2 halves of the molds together once they fit perfectly due to the registration keys that you guys made for them. Now you guys are going to pour some part A to a measuring cup measuring 8 ounces. Now keep in mind that it doesn't have to be 8 ounces at all, as long as both cups are enough to cover up most of the mold. Next, pour some part B into a separate measuring cup. As long as both parts are equal in amount to each other, then you guys are good to go. Now for the base color of the mask itself. You guys will then take a popsicle stick and scoop the desired pigment that you want to act as the primary color of the cast of your mask. This is important because the base color will help shape up the paint job of the mask when you guys are in the painting step, rather than leaving the color of the cast default. Now since the theme of the design is a scarecrow, I'm going to put some brown pigment into part B. So now once you guys have added part A to part B and mixed it thoroughly, you guys can now apply some slacker. This part is optional. Now what slacker does is that it makes the silicone batch more elastic and soft, similar to human skin once it's mixed into the batch. Now there is no specific amount on how much you guys mix this in with the batch, so add as much as you want. So once the slacker has been added and mixed thoroughly, you guys can now pour the whole entire EcoFlex batch into the full-headed mold. Unlike latex, you guys will need to keep an eye out when casting silicone, since you can't slip cast this material. Meaning, sooner or later you guys will need to swish the silicone again around the mold, since it starts to build up in the bottom. The good news about EcoFlex silicone is that it only takes probably about 15 minutes for the silicone to thicken and harden up inside the mold, if you guys mixed it right. Once this starts to occur, you guys can then stop swishing it around, now that it is permanently set in place. Once the first layer is dry, depending on how much you guys have mixed in, you guys can then repeat the process of mixing silicone to create another layer. Now for EcoFlex, the beauty of this type of silicone is that you don't need a lot of layers to create a cast that will not rip at all. If you guys are lucky enough, you may even hit the perfect amount of silicone needed to create the cast of the mask without it ripping, and also without adding a second layer in. But once the first layer is dry, and if there are still areas where you guys feel that it's too thin, then I highly suggest you guys add a second layer just to ensure the durability of the silicone cast. So once all that stuff is done, it's time to pull out the silicone cast from its mold. When doing this, be extremely careful when pulling out a silicone cast, because it has the tendency to rip if you guys made your cast too thin.
Manipulated with no discretion.
So that's pretty much it for casting. I showed you guys how to cast with the basic latex, and I showed you guys how to cast the complicated EcoFlex silicone. So based on this video, you guys can tell how complicated mixing silicone is compared to latex. To me personally, I only use EcoFlex silicone for my death masks and my full head masks. The latex, on the other hand, I'm using for my face masks, since latex is pretty rigid. Once you have passed the casting stage, you are now ready to paint the blank cast that you guys have now. So stay tuned for Mask Making Tutorial V2 Part 6. Painting.